Welcome to the TryPod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn, and here I am to preview round 15 in the NRL. We don't do a regular recap show anymore, guys, so I'll try and use the start of the preview to quickly touch on sort of what happened in the prior round, as well as always owning up to best bets. Again, the reason I'm not doing the regular recap, just to conserve my time to ensure I can keep delivering for the preview. So try and give you my big takeaways from the round that was, along with best bet results. I didn't deliver, unfortunately, with my results last week. Went 1 and 2. The Storm was comfortable enough on Friday night. And then you go to the Bunnies game, like 12-0 up. You're loving that when you got plus 8.5, even 12-6 lead into the second half. But as they have on numerous occasions this year, the Raiders romped home. It was 30-0 to Canberra in the second half. Like Cody Walker got injured. Someone asked me a question about Ethan Sanders, and I started talking about Ethan Strange a week ago, saying I think he's got rep footy written all over him. He had two really big individual tries that swung that game for Canberra. And I thought South should have stopped those, but special players can do special things. It was a magical finish for Papa, you have to say that. He got a late double. And you know what? Souths, who usually are good for fighting for 80 minutes, actually sort of gave up. You could see the moment their hearts broke with about 10 to go when they were out by 10 or 12 points. And unfortunately, that one just wasn't going to go our way. You could say the Canberra comeback was predictable, but the Raiders were the only team in the comp that had played 14 straight games, and they played in Vegas as well. And I strive to bet on teams in optimal weeks where they can succeed, hopefully, but also I look to bet against teams in periods where they could struggle. Canberra certainly defied my thinking, defied the bet, and then it was a similar story, but even more extreme. I got the New Zealand Cronulla game really wrong, didn't I? And that's why I went 1 and 2. New Zealand shocked me. Their ability to play, a far fresher home Sharks side off the park, where it was the New Zealand were far more intense, far more enthusiastic. And I think that second half score was 28-0 to the visitors as well. So the Sharks were stunned, as was I, because I was really confident that that's the type of week Cronulla wins. And I thought going in, Cronulla was the better team. I said as much, that they were straight up better. But you have to reevaluate now. Like, obviously, I have to upgrade the Warriors in my book when they can play like that in what was an outstanding spot for the Sharks, who themselves were already off a 30-point loss. And, I talk about a good team off a bad loss. So are the Sharks a good team? Let me know what you think. And also, how much better are the Warriors even with the loss of Barnett? I have to probably, upgrade that New Zealand side further. And I want to get into some top four talk. Is the top four already set? Who can actually win the comp at this point in the season? I've got to talk origin selections reaction as well, because obviously there's some big decisions made, especially on the Queensland side. And I want to dedicate a little segment in a minute to sort of give you my thoughts on those. But I owe you best bets. So, and there's a question about minor premiership bets for Canberra. I brought that up last week, and that was the Undertaker's tip, which he shared in the group with a full write-up and at $4. I haven't looked again how short of Canberra. They're probably closer to, honestly, Canberra's probably closer to $2 than $4 now. The Sharkies, some comments about the Sharkies, like those back-to-back games by the Sharks, yes, there was a bye in between. That's as bad as any team has tossed up in the competition. And the Sharks are a good side, but the Sharks, as you can see on my screen, play first this round. So we'll get to them shortly. In fact, I'm going to bring up Cronulla again because I'm about to share my best bets. And you guessed it, I am going Cronulla minus 9.5 at $1.87 on 365, also $1.85 on Dabble against the Dragons. I know what you're thinking. The Sharks have let us down. I think the Sharks have been 2 of my 3 losses in the last 3 weeks, and they've only played twice in the last 3 weeks, and both times they were significant favourites and blown off the park. I just think this is a pivotal game. I can't completely explain why Cronulla's been that bad, but you're catching a depleted Dragon side as well that's really struggling, and Cronulla just have absolutely no excuses. They're at home, near enough full strength. Mulatalo's back off these horrible losses. This is still a Sharks team that's been, 2nd, 4th, 6th every year under Fitzgibbon. I can't explain the Sharks being as bad as they've been in their last couple of games, and I definitely expect the bounce back, and I'll get more into it in a minute. Dan says Winnie O'Brien. Yeah, O'Brien certainly got all the excuses, and he can explain anything. I just know I've got to be on Cronulla this week, -9.5, as much as some people won't want to be. But I'll get into that, why I still think there's line value. Then I'm going the Cowboys +6.5 at $1.95. That's an alt line on 365 against my Finns. The Cowboys are at home. The Cowboys have numerous origin outs, but with Taulagi back, Taumalolo also returning. Dolphins lose the hammer, but Plath injured as well. Actually, quite a few forwards are out for my Finns. I can't justify the Cowboys. The consensus line is only 4.5, and even I think that's a bit high. But I've actually got a 6.5 at $1.95. I just had to do it. That may be my first bet against the Finns this season, and I'll explain my thinking a bit further there too. But basically, I reckon that's probably the tightest game of the weekend for mine. And the Cowboys have every chance of winning that. And I can't see the Dolphins being so far superior that they should be favoured by a converted try on the road against North Queensland. And I'm actually going to also take another underdog on Sunday. We only got 5 games this week, but I've still found 3 best bets. I'm going Rabbitohs +8.5 at $1.82 on Sportsbet. Rabbitohs play the high-flying Bulldogs, but with 4 key men out for the Doggies, though Preston does come back. I basically just think the Bunnies can keep this close enough, and I was probably prepared to leave it at 7.5 and at 8.5. Just feeling these origin-affected weeks, there's a lot more unpredictable footy and new combinations. As good as the Dogs have looked, last time the Dogs played without their origin men, they were blown off the park by my Finns. Bunnies uncharacteristically gave up last week, but generally you get a good fight out of Bennett's men. I know this was a blowout on Good Friday, but there's revenge factor there for Souths, who still have something to offer, I feel, in that one. So those are my 3 best bets. Let me know what you reckon. I love seeing all the comments coming through. Colt never thought Sharks were a premiership threat. Luke, think you were right on Sharks. You're right on Sharks this week. I was on Wars last week. Well, you picked it there. Can't read every comment, so can't always understand the context of every comment. Sorry. Luke, tried telling you Hines shouldn't be in the halves. Just comment. 3rd time's a charm. Most teams cover the handicap after conceding 50. But most teams cover the handicap after conceding 50. Well, that's the thing. The Dragons had a diabolical loss last week as well, but a couple other people also liking the plays, which I appreciate. Let me throw up the origin teams now. We shift gears just to do a little bit of origin reaction. I'd love to hear what you guys made of it as well, guys. So tell me sort of what were the biggest talking points to you. Obviously, we'll start with New South Wales, who only had one question to be answered, really. Who would place Barnett? Cruel season-ending injury for Barney. Yuto Kamano was in camp for game 1. The Storm had a good win on Friday night. Then he gets to rest up while Koloamatangi, another option, Terrell May, they didn't play till Sunday, and their teams both lost. Maybe if Laurie left it up to the final day, that sealed it for Stefano. Other than that, there were no anticipated changes for the Blues. They won game 1, 4 tries to 1, as we covered, right? If you're curious, I looked up the line for game 2 in Perth minutes after the Blues had won at Suncorp. And the early line was Blues -5.5. But if you look up the odds for Origin 2 now, it is -8.5. And I'm not going to weigh in terms of where I see the value, but you certainly can. So please let me know if you're making any bets on Origin. But that's the equivalent of Queensland being like a $3, $3.20 head-to-head underdog as well. And that's not just off the back of the Cherry Evans dropping either. Like, that line had got to -8.5 even late last week, And maybe that's built in a little bit, but I don't think that's a downgrade for Queensland. I will say that. Look, I think I explained in my Origin recap for game 1 and also in my preview, if it was me picking the Maroons team, I think Dearden is the better player than DCE, and Queensland needed all the help they could get to break down the Blues, and I would have picked Dearden in the halves with Munster going into this series. However, to not pick Dearden or not to pick DCE in game one, I think Billy's made a mistake to then change your captain and change your halfback mid-series. Like, I just feel Billy had to know who his better option was. And if you know that Dearden is the better option at this point in time over DCE, I do understand the tricky part for Billy is Billy can't show his hand too early. He can't call DCE and give him a heads up a couple of weeks out of Origin and say, look, I'm not going to pick you this year. I just want to give you the heads up, like, respect everything you've done, but I'm going to go in a different direction. Billy couldn't do that because if Munster or Dearden got hurt the week before the game was picked, then DCE would need to be there. And DCE wanted to be there, right? So I can understand Billy had to leave it right up until the day before the team needed to be selected for camp. But I just feel like you had to choose who's the best decision for Queensland to play halfback, and therefore whose is the best captain. Because if DCE is not your halfback, DCE is not your captain. I just feel like you get everyone into camp. You let Dearden and Munster have all those repetitions in game one camp. You let them play together at Suncorp together, and regardless of the result, Queensland would be in a better position for game two, right? And I just feel like now, because they've had to change mid-series and change captain mid-series, and look, I don't mind Munster being the captain. He's the type of player I think will thrive and is clearly being given the green light to sort of dominate the team, dominate the ball. I thought Harry Grant would have been captain, considering Grant is obviously the Storm captain. It's just that basically Billy has used game one to make this decision. I mean, DCE did not stand out to me as really having such a poor game. I said in the recap, it's not Cherry Evans' fault that he's 36 years old now and he's just not the same level of player as his counterparts like Mitch Moses and Nathan Cleary on the other side. That's not DCE's fault. But ultimately, it's not really about whether DCE had a bad game. It's probably just, does Dearden have more to offer at this point? The rest of the changes, I don't know if Capewell is a better player than Beau Fermor. I know Warriors fans love Capewell. He certainly is versatile. Maybe you need him there because he could shift to center. Did you see the stats, though? I think Clarkey put up some stats that Capewell leads the comp in missed tackles by quite a long way. I think it's a classic case of Fermor's in a team that's running last and absolutely struggling, and Capewell's in a team that's flying top four. So just bringing in those habits and vibes and energy, I suppose. But sometimes I wonder, is that really the player's fault? Is it Fermor's fault that the Titans are going so badly? You look at Kurt Mann at utility there. He doesn't scare New South Wales. Some people are shocked that Liero is named to start. But to me, who starts, it doesn't really make a big difference. You don't know if that's how it'll be on the night. And it's much more about the minutes they play. And I would still assume that Carrigan gets the bulk minutes. And I have to also raise this question. Why is Ezra Mam the 18th man? I just feel like Queensland needs fans behind him, and you're going to pick a player who is very controversial, who has been booed by his own home fans in Brisbane. I was thinking about Queensland's options this year, and the thought crossed my mind, Ezra Mam, purely on ability, I get it. But then I thought to myself, you just don't pick him this year. You let him come back from his obviously challenging situation and, take responsibility, you hope, and redeem himself somewhat. And then next year, Mam could be in the mix. But to pick him after he's only been back 2 or 3 weeks, and you're not actually picking him in the 17, so you're just bringing in that negative attention, I don't really understand it. Last point, New South Wales fans are loving the fact that Queensland have dropped their captain mid-series, throwing it in our faces that, our famous Queensland loyalty. I mentioned this on my bonus episode. I won't go into it too much, but Queensland may have more loyal tendencies in their selection history, but the main reason Queensland is seen as more loyal is Queensland has always and every single year a significantly smaller pool of players to pick from. Therefore, there will always be more opportunities for the best Queensland players than there will be for the Blues. They will be picked earlier, Maroons players. They will have generally longer origin careers because they're not being replaced as quickly because there aren't as many other options. And form will play less of a factor because Queensland doesn't have as much depth to be picky, as opposed to New South Wales, if you've got 2 or 3 times as many players, you've always got the best players in the competition at those positions beating down the door. And if you're loyal to other players, then you're not picking the best players available. And on top of that, I mentioned this in my pod a few weeks ago too, like Queensland has won 15 of the last 20 series. So naturally, you just don't change winning squads as much. It's a luxury that you don't need to. But it's a little bit different now. Queensland lost last series. Queensland has lost 3 in a row, 2 in a row at Suncorp. Queensland scored 1 try in those 160 minutes in Brisbane. Change was justified. So, look, I could actually keep talking Origin, but I'll resist the urge to go further into that. Let's do an Origin preview show next week, Sunday or Monday night. So many comments flying through. Sorry, when I go on a bit of a monologue, I can't keep up with the comments, but let me address some of those now. Bunnies, the Papali milestone, the Raiders were never losing. The good old were never after the fact. Look, if the Raiders had lost, everyone would have said, of course, the Raiders lost. They played 14 straight weeks. The bias, the draw is so unfair. And Ricky would have been the first to say that he would have blamed the draw. And actually, I thought the Bunnies were every chance in that game, but as I addressed earlier, it violently swung. The Dogs will smash the Bunnies, who lose Mitchell and Keon. Keon's playing. Keon was overlooked by the Blues. Of course, you lose Latrell Mitchell, but Jai Gray is a good replacement there. We saw what he did earlier this year. Blues, too tough, too strong, 13+. Whitewash incoming. I did give you that tip in the Origin preview. Blues, $3.80 for 3-0, and they're now about $1.90 for 3-0. If the Blues click, Queensland are gone. New South Wales 30+ has just been commented by Barney, who's a staunch Queenslander. Queensland had to change it up. Dearden, more to offer with his running game. Oh, I agree. That's the style that Billy wants to play for sure. DCE was good. Now we don't have a halfback. Like, that's the risk as well for Queensland. Neither of them a natural halfback in the halves who's kicking, as opposed to New South Wales has 2 natural halfbacks, which is double the sort of last tackle options in terms of kicking. Dearden is mid. Billy and Peter V'landys have 2 things in common. Money. Queensland forwards still get thumped. Dan Lever remembering the good times with Fermor when we had him for some try scorer bets back in the day. How does the pack get done? And he makes it worse and decimates the back row. That's the question for Billy Slater. The thing is, I think without me going into the game, the Blues have the better team. So there was no magic pill. There was no player or players out there that could save Queensland. I said that, in the series or in the game 1 recap as well. Okay. Only 5 games to cover. So we did some side notes there. Of course, I want to cover what's most topical to you guys, what you're interested in, and what you're having conversations about with your friends and at work, right? So, you know what? Actually, let's spend a minute on top 4, right? I'll bring up the ladder because my question I pose to you is the top 4 done now? With that win, and again, shout out The Undertaker. He gave out Raiders. They are not currently top, but the Raiders are yet to have a bye. The Raiders are 11-3. The Dogs are 10-2. So the Raiders have played 2 extra games than the Bulldogs. That means the Raiders, who are idle this week, still have 3 byes yet to enjoy. You got $4 about that from The Undertaker. The other games the Raiders have really are friendly. Not too many contenders, if any, in there for the Raiders. They've played the bulk of their tough games. So pretty much lock in the Raiders for top 4. And I think that's a great bet, that minor premiership bet. Then you've got the Bulldogs, and we saw how good they were on Monday. That game was tight for a while, but then Galvin comes in, and that coincides with the Dogs blowing the Eagles out late, and the Dogs just looking so sharp, and the rich get richer with Galvin coming in there. How they fit him in, we'll talk about that because the Dogs do play, and I have best bet against them this week, and Galvin is starting. The Storm's going to be there, right? Storm 8 wins, 4 losses, and even some of those 4 losses have been a bit surprising. And you go down to Cronulla, who are 7-6, but it's the Warriors whose win over Cronulla really tipped the scales for me, because I would have said a week ago Cronulla gets in over the Warriors for top 4, because I thought that Cronulla was a better team. Neither is very affected by Origin, but Cronulla even less so than New Zealand. But I thought Cronulla was going to win that game. So now that didn't happen. That sort of swings the ultimate ladder standings by 4 points. It also means, in my mind, I have to boost the New Zealand power rating and I have to downgrade Cronulla. And now there's what did I just say? Cronulla is a 7-win team versus the Warriors a 10-win team. So there's sort of 3 wins between those sides. So are the Warriors a lock for top 4? And therefore, is that current top 4 going to remain? Is there anyone you can see getting into the top 4? I think it will be those sides in some order. And then that raises the next question. Can anybody win the comp? Because we always talk about how it's almost impossible to win the comp from outside the top 4. A couple of teams I didn't get to touch on because we didn't do a recap show, but Penrith, they were top 3, obviously, preseason favourites. Brisbane was also top 3 preseason favourites. Like, those 2 teams got very important wins on the weekend. What about a sleeper team like the Roosters? Sam Walker is back this week. I'm just posing the question at this point. Can anyone outside the top 4 win the comp? And is that top 4 pretty much locked in? And I reckon most of you guys are going to say the top 4 will stand till the end. In fact, JK goes as far to say Warriors are locked in for the premiership. So, you don't want to just think, well, if the top 4 is locked in now, only 4 teams can win it. The other 13 are just playing for fun. Because you do feel like someone like Penrith gets, or even, dare I say, Brisbane gets on a heater. They're the type of teams no one's going to want to play in the finals, potentially. But it's exciting for the fan bases of teams like, Canterbury showed a lot last year, didn't win a finals game, though. New Zealand, great run a couple of years ago, but recapturing that 2023 form, and obviously Canberra, especially Canberra and New Zealand, with the amount of young talent they have. And how professional Canterbury are looking as well. All those clubs have such bright futures. And then you've got the Storm, who have been one of the contenders in the comp for the last basically 20 years, but looking as good as anybody in the comp this year, and had a comfortable win on the weekend. Okay, now I'm ready to dive into the 5 games, guys. So let's do it. I've already got it on the screen. Sharks, Dragons. Dragons are a 9.5-point underdog. It's at Sharks Stadium. Is that the problem? How is it not called Shark Park? I feel like they've dropped the ball there. So both sides off crushing defeats. We've sort of covered Cronulla. The Dragons were decimated by my Dolphins. It was a 50-point hero out for the Sharks. Mulatalo back in. No origin representation for Cronulla. The Dragons do lose Val Holmes. Corey Allen and Tyrell Sloan are into the back line. It's a tough game, I suppose, because both sides had such bad losses last week. St. George, I feel like, played some solid footy for 5 or 6 weeks prior to being steamrolled at Suncorp. And then the Sharks, has their season been derailed in the last 2 games? Blown out by 30 points either side of the bye. And I've really thought a lot about it and watched Cronulla closely, and I wish I could tell you exactly what's wrong, but it just seems like Cronulla lacked intensity and, dare I say, expected to win those games against an undermanned Roosters and against a Warriors side that had been on the road for several of the most recent weeks. That's just not the character of Fitzgibbon team that sort of has displayed a lot of toughness in his tenure there. And you think that the Sharkies would be cashing in on a period like this without any rep players. Again, Fitzgibbon, under his watch, that team has come 2nd, 6th, 4th, very consistent, and have been anything but the last 2 weeks. However, I can't play St. George here. Given those extremely disappointing results for the Sharkies, I know I will sound like I'm repeating myself a bit because of similar reasons I gave for Cronulla last week, and we saw how that worked out. And it was more than missing Mulatalo, though his inclusion will boost the energy. I will say, if there's just something festering under the surface that I can't see about Cronulla, then maybe they'll continue to underperform. But failing that, I think the Sharkies step up in a must-win game, full strength at home. Yes, it's a derby, so you could argue that makes it closer, but that should amplify Cronulla's intensity, which has been lacking. The Sharks are superior in every facet of the game to mine. Like, it's a better forward pack. They've got the more explosive backs. They've got the better halves, better bench, better coach. And maybe this line would be greater. It certainly would be a lot higher if Cronulla had been performing. But the thing is, that's offset by the fact that St. George were flogged last week too. So I get it. It is a pretty high line. 9.5, 365 is the best bet. It's 10.5 in other places as well. I just think the Sharks will be out for blood here. I know they've cost me as a favourite 2 of the last 3 weeks, but I'm going to give them one last shot here to show some character, show a response, and lay it all on the line and right the ship. Now, 2 of our sharpshooters also have their best bet on this game, so I can't wait to hear. Let's hear from Benny Williamson first. It'll be a try scorer angle.
G'day TryPod fam, as always thanks to the lads for having me on. Apologies for those following me in over the last couple of weeks. Got to 5-5 and dropped the last 2, so we're at 7-5. Not going to rest in our laurels. We've got some diabolical pricing on the wingers this weekend. We're going to go with Braden Trindle priced at $4.25 and Bet365. Left halves are striking against the Dragons at around 42% this year. He's well below his try scoring record from last year. He picked up 10 last year. He's only got the 2 so far, but both of those have been at Shark Park, and the Dragons have had left halves go in 2 of the last 3 rounds. I think it was Mam and Nikorima having a bit of success against them. Trindle's a great runner and he always aims up at Shark Park, and at 4.25, happy to take him on. Best of luck, lads. Let's go.
And let's roll straight into Undertaker's tip.
G'day guys, my play of the week, I'm going to go against my brand and take an over, 47.5, $1.91 Bet365 in Canberra versus South. There's been 5 games played in Canberra this season and only one of them has failed to hit 52 points or more. There's been some huge scores we've seen there. Nice sunny day on Sunday in the nation's capital. I'm expecting more of the same. South are getting a few key players back, which will help their ability to score points.
Sorry guys, geez, I thought Undertaker was drunk. I'm like, did I mishear that? He's talking about Canberra, nation's capital, and then I realized I'm playing last week's tip. So let's just call that a victory lap for Undertaker, because he had over 47.5. It lands 48, and he got those late tries by Papa, and then they gave Papa the conversion, which would have been a pretty simple kick for a normal regular kicker, but they gave it to Papa, who actually slotted it, and Undertaker won by half a point. My apologies, I played the wrong clip. I do have the correct one here.
G'day TryPod, my bet of the week is going to be one I tried a couple of weeks ago and failed at, but that's Cronulla Sharks not to trail in the game at $2.70 on Bet365. Look, if we go 1-1 on these kind of bets at $2.70, we're making money, so I'm going to give it another crack. The Sharks have been absolutely horrible the last 2 weeks, getting flogged by the Roosters and the Warriors at home. They're back at home again, unaffected by Origin. Surely they come out with their hair on fire. You can only imagine the mood at training the last 2 weeks. Desperation's going to be an 11 out of 10. They've got to get right against the Dragons. So I'm going to embrace a bit of variance. They're going to come out stronger. I don't think they're going to give up the lead. $2.70 looks like a good price. Let's go for it. Good luck.
11 out of 10 desperation. Love it. Undertaker. So he's seeing it similar to me. I know you've got to have a bit of faith to take Cronulla. But then again, it's against the Dragons, who were probably even worse last weekend. Let's move to Friday then. Titans, Seagulls at Seabus, Manly, a 10.5 point road favourite. Speaking of teams that had bad losses last round, now here's a genuine question for you guys. What's a worse loss? Is it being pumped from the outset of the game, pretty much 2 sets in? You can tell it's going to be a long night like the Titans were by the All Blacks on Saturday night. Or is it worse to lose in extra time? From a punting perspective and a tipster as well, I can tell you it definitely hurts more to lose the close ones, but especially if you're Manly, they blew a 3-try lead as well before losing in extra time. They gave up the lead, then they got it back and then blew it again. So that hurts Manly a lot. And Lehigh Hopewadi was lost early in that game. And if Hopewadi doesn't get injured, maybe it's a different result, because Manly would have had a bit more to offer. He's been in that great a form. And of course, then you don't have to shuffle your multiple players in the back line. That's all part of the game, but it definitely hurt Manly a lot, because Lehigh Hopewadi, in getting concussed, also dropped a 6-pointer as well. And of course, that compounded the fact that Turbo was already missing. But as you can see from the team list, Tom is back this week. So is Saab. No Origin reps for the Undertaker's team. So a year ago, Manly had 3 Origin players and 2 of them were the captains. So that's a fair relief for Manly that, of course, none of those players have been selected for this year's series. The Titans, of course, do lose their captain, Tino, plus Fotoaker from the middle. Fermor overlooked. At least that may please Des a little bit, who, let's not forget, Des Hasler's only in his second year, but is probably on the hottest seat in the NRL, given that AOB pulled out the 2 points over these Seagulls that we just mentioned. Similar to, well, I've played Cronulla, right, the previous game. Even though they've been awful, I feel like they've been doing a lot of soul searching, but they could burst out with a big win. That was the case for Brisbane last week. And I said that 7 days ago. I should have been on Brisbane, even though everyone else had written Brisbane off. But the reason I didn't play Brisbane, and I think that line was about 9.5, 10.5 against the Gold Coast. The reason I didn't play Brisbane, I think even maybe 8.5. Anyway, I didn't play the Broncos because I didn't want to bet against the ugliest duckling in the league. And that's why I won't play Manly this week, because who out there is taking the Titans? Like, someone in the comments tell me you're backing the Titans plus 10.5 this week with confidence, right? Whereas for Manly, they have gone loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. So what's coming next, right? I've talked about that yo-yo form. And on top of that, like, you got DCE in a statement game potentially. You got both Trebojevics, well, all three Trebojevics on deck. You got Olakau'atu. He's one of the best forwards in the comp, but he can't make the Origin side either. You got a long turnaround, and it's a must-win game. Manly still believe they can make the 8, but you can't lose games like this against the bottom of the ladder and then make the 8. So plenty of logic will tell you Manly wins here. All I'll say is be aware the Titans, they're completely written off by everyone. They've hit rock bottom, or have they? I guess we'll find out if they can go any lower this week. I just still look at, players like Bremo, Campbell, Khan Pereira that can create something out of nothing. Des digging deep into his bag against his former team. After the Gold Coast were embarrassed, they are at home. I could see the Titans serving up a bit of fight and surprising potentially, though I certainly don't have any faith in that. Zane says you can still get $3.50 for the Raiders for the minor prem on Dabble, and they are as low as $2.75 in other places. I think that's great advice, Zane. Like, if you could have got $4 on the Raiders last week, and I loved Undertaker's breakdown, but I was very wary of Souths being a danger game for Canberra, so I would have just wanted to see them win that game. And now you're still only sacrificing sort of $4 down to $3.50. I think now is the time to take the Raiders. So good call there, Zane. So that's sort of that game is I've explained why I am not on either side in that one, because it wouldn't shock me if there's a surprise, but it's also pretty logical that Manly could win and win well. That's Friday night, singular game. Then we have a double header on Saturday as I scroll to Knights Roosters. We talked about the comeback or the blown result by Manly. The other side of that was, of course, the Knights. What was that great line by Adam O'Brien? I was having a bit of fun with it, as you see on my socials, and drawing parallels between myself and Adam O'Brien. But one line I didn't bring up where he said, the same people booing were the ones who were cheering when we won. It's like, yes, of course they were. They're your most loyal members. They're sitting out in the cold on a Thursday night. They're paying their money to support your team. You've been absolutely awful for 10 straight rounds. You had 2 wins, which were against severely understrength sides, as I outlined last week, and you were down 16-0 and playing horrendous. And then you're going to arc up when people voice their disappointment. It'll be those same fans in the stands this week, because once again, the Knights are playing at McDonald Jones. And, maybe I should use that line for my best bets, hey? Like, the same people who bag me when I go 1-2 are the ones cheering when I go 3-0. It's called I guess it's called being in a results-based business. But that goes back to half-time in Knights Manly last week, but that wasn't the end of the story. And to the delight of the Padonis, mentioned Undertaker got a win last week, as did the Padonis. He had Knights plus 8.5. And as you know, Newcastle came all the way back and actually win the game outright. And it was like a different team. Suddenly the Knights had shape and were isolating defenders out wide with either the wide running forwards or the centres. They were shifting from inside their own half. The Knights were not just tossing it to KP and expecting him to create. And Newcastle not only wins, which will give them some extra confidence and revitalize the season to a degree, but also showed some signs of being able to attack in the second stanza. And Newcastle actually aren't the worst defensive side. So if you can defend to a decent level and keep teams to 3 or 4 tries, it's just a question of whether you can score that many. And Newcastle, for the majority of the season, have given you no confidence in the attack. But then that second half, like where did that come from? And I don't know if that was Manly falling apart, making Newcastle look good, but it was definitely a change of mindset. Now, maybe that was a team with nothing to lose, and maybe that's not something that Newcastle could bottle up and just play from the outset here. But it's something at least to pay attention to, as opposed to the Roosters, who were on a bye last week, are probably at this point are a tougher challenge than Manly, because of course Manly had no Turbo, Hopewadi got injured. But speaking of weapons missing, the Chooks of course have 5 Origin representatives. So there is no Rob Toyer, there's no Watson, Crichton, Collins, Lenu this week. But the Roosters do get back into 4. White and Sam Walker returns. He played New South Wales Cup last week, and of course he did his ACL a year ago, and this is his first grade game. So Savala goes to 6. Sandon Smith is at 14. Nwanga Tuaze moves to centre. Dom Young is on the wing before he then transfers to Newcastle after the game, is what I hear. So that makes Young an interesting player to watch. Newcastle lose Ponga. Frizzell got injured. Sharp goes to fullback. Hastings is in for the first time this year at 5'8". Crossland is at 13. So lots of chopping and changing for both of these teams. And I'll sort of go off on another tangent here. Like I always say, I love the challenge of the Origin affected weeks. I don't hate the current structure. It seems topical for people to say, well, we need to change this. Too many good players missing regular NRL games. How do you guys feel about that? I don't mind it at all. I hear people saying, oh, they hate it. It affects the credibility of the competition because the best players are missing sort of in and out of the teams for like 6 weeks. Is it that bad? I feel like in these games, you see other players step up. You see some fresh faces. You see some opportunities for players that have been knocking on the door, or you see some players of the future. And I feel like it tests the depth of teams a little bit, and it tests the guile of the coaches. I mean, is the quality drastically worse? I guess ultimately for me, when I watch a game of rugby league, as long as it's played with effort and intensity, and often younger players and fringe players provide that, I still think it's an entertaining game. It might not, of course, be as sharp. I've got no issue with it. I don't know what the better alternative is. I don't want to shut down the season for a month. I think that's a can of worms there, right? Just to play the rep footy. What does everyone else do? And you have to have Origin this time of year. I think the broadcasters demand it based on the ratings. So I think the way it is not that bad. Whether you could condense Origin a little bit and go like a Wednesday, and then the next game was a Sunday, and it was only a week and a half or 2.5 weeks later, not 3. I don't know. Like then it would be a smaller portion of the season that would be affected. And look, the fact that the best players play Origin and somewhat should be an equalizer, because in theory, you take the best players out of the competition, it should even things up, because generally the better teams would have more rep players. Of course, it doesn't always work that way. And the Roosters were bottom half of the ladder this year and still had 5 Origin reps. Newcastle only 1. I said at the top, don't sleep on the Roosters. Like you saw what a different team Parramatta have been since Moses comes back. And I just wonder if Walker can have that similar impact. And the ladder is congested enough that the Tricolours are very much in the top 8 hunt. And then I guess anything can happen, although I often am one to say you don't win the comp, or you can't win the comp from outside the top 4. But you can. It's just very unlikely. But, not everyone's going to win the comp. But teams like the Roosters, the Broncos, the Panthers, you get into that 5th to 8th range and you get a win that week, and then you play somebody who lost in week 1 of the finals, and these teams can make a prelim run. It's still open for anybody, really. Where am I at? This week, the Roosters are on the bye. That would help. But Newcastle stays at home and played 9 days prior to this. So no excuse, although when I say no excuse, if anyone can find an excuse, you know who can. I do expect the Roosters are going to roll here, though, because they do have the better coaching, the better leadership. I just won't bet this line because it's over a converted try. If I didn't mention, the Roosters are 7.5-point favourites. And that Newcastle roster still have enough pieces to be competitive in this when the Roosters, as I say, are short 5 rep players. Let's move to later Saturday, where I do have a best bet at Queensland Country Bank Stadium. And my best bet is Cowboys plus 6.5 at 195 on 365. And that's in the alt line. Let me explain why that is soon. I said I didn't do the recap show, but I did a recap post, and I said those Dolphins are the best 6 and 7 team in the history of the NRL, I reckon. To have a losing record after 13 rounds, how are the Dolphins got a losing record? They're that good when they're on, but they travel to North Queensland, who also have a losing record. The Cowboys are 5, 6, and 1, and are higher in the ladder because the Cows have had 2 byes to the Finns 1, I think. The line is 4.5 everywhere. The Dolphins are road favourites. That's because the Cowboys have no Dearden, Nanai, Cotter, Robson, Vilea, and Bateman are injured. However, Taulungi and Taumalolo are welcome inclusions. Dolphins lose Hammer, Avarillo to fullback, Plath out as well. These are 2 teams very capable of lighting up the field when they're in a mood, but with both without key pieces, I think this game complete shootout. I think it could be a little bit more gritty. The Cowboys were outclassed at Amy Park, just couldn't cash in on a lot of sustained pressure against the Storm, and I'm thankful for that because that was my one best bet winner. And if the Cowboys had got across the line a couple of times in that first half when they had a mountain possession, it could have been closer for a longer period of that one. But ultimately, the Storm burned the Cows at the end of each half, as opposed to the Dolphins. They had basically had a training run out against the Dragons. And what did I say in the preview? I thought Katoa could be the difference. There obviously was a far greater difference between the Finns and Dargans, but Katoa was unreal, blossoming before our eyes. And you look at, I'll scroll further on the team list, but you look at Jackson Purdue, who's at 5'8" again for North Queensland. Like Purdue, Katoa, is that an Origin face-off in 5 years from now? Is this a glimpse into the future? I agree that the Dolphins are the better team and closer to complete, but we've got bad news this week, Finns fans. Gilbert is out for the season. Saifidi is out for the season. Plath is out this week. Flegler is anyone's guess. Like, that's the Dolphins' 4 best forwards, plus the Hammer, of course. So I just feel like the Cowboys, with the reinforcements, being at home, Drinkwater's the captain, I don't see the Dolphins blowing the Cows out. I think it's a tight one. I think it's game of the round. I'm an open Finns fan, right? So you know my relationship to the team. I'll be cheering. Can I have it both ways? Can I get a Dolphins 1-6 win? That would be sweet. I actually, in self-evaluation, I haven't gone against the Dolphins all season, but I've consistently said that's because I think the Dolphins are better than the market reflects, especially after the Dolphins started 0-4. And I was telling you guys, they're still a top 8 caliber side, and now they actually find themselves in the 8. But maybe after a 50-point win in prime time, the pendulum has swung, because I thought this line should be -2.5, and we're getting plus 6.5. And that is because all the bookies are at 4.5, but there's so much juice on the Finns, especially on 365, where -4.5 is like $1.80. So therefore, we actually get a very nice price on the plus 6.5 on 365. It's also plus 6.5 in the alt lines on Dabble as well. And wouldn't you know it, Padonis's pick is on this game too. So I reckon he found the same play.
Hey guys, Padonis here, coming to you for another live edition on Tuesday's show with Winnie. We saluted last week with the Newcastle Knights coming back from 16-0, just the way we like it. And for round 15, Origin affected, we're going to go for another underdog. And that's going to be the North Queensland Cowboys, plus 6.5. That's an alt line, $1.95 on Bet365. I know the Cows are missing 4 of their best players to Origin, but they get back JT, Tomalaulau, and Murray Tulagi on the wing to help shore up their outside backs. And Jake Clifford's probably the best backup half in the game out of the current crop at the moment. And the Dolphins themselves are not without some injuries as well. Max Plath, unfortunately, succumbs to another one, as well as missing the Hammer at the back there and coming off a 50-point shellacking last week against the Dragons. Could be a little bit of complacency here for the Finns. I know that the Cowboys are going to be right up for the contest here, off a defeat to Melbourne. And if you looked at Payton's press conference last week, he didn't hold back in his assessment of his team. So I think they're going to be right up for it. Plus 6.5 is a little bit too many points. I think the bookmakers have overcorrected for the Origin outs. And all you have to do is look at this same fixture last year when the Cowboys went away to the Roosters without all their Origin stars and won as a 16.5 point underdog. So they've done it before. They can do it again. Drinkwater captain. They don't have to win this game, but I think they're live for the outright. So happy to take the points. Good luck. Gamble responsibly.
As Luke says, Cows straight up his value. I like that too. So pull back the curtain a bit further. I looked at it and went, geez, I think I've got to be on Cowboys plus 4.5 here. And once I realized that, I thought it's definitely a correct read, because I'm the last person who really wants to back against the Finns. And if my instinct's telling me that, like, why the Finns are 4.5 point favorite, I think I've got to do it. And then I'm starting to see that the minus 4.5 is juice, and I say, all right, if I can find a plus 6.5, like, it's a slam dunk. And I'm looking and it's $1.79 or better. And then I'm looking at Dabble and I'm going, oh, it's $1.83. And I that's a pretty good play. And then I just check 365 and it's $1.95. And I'm like, what a find. It's as much as it hurts me to bet against my own team. Like, I put the pod first, of course. And I'm like, that's an outstanding play. And of course, then when Padonis sends me his clip and I see he's on the same game, I said to myself, guarantee he's found that same play. And I promise you, I get that clip 10 minutes before I'm live. I've already locked in my place. I feel like people could be suspicious because we even use the same word. I heard Padonis say shellacking. I promise you, I haven't even seen that clip. I don't have time to watch the clips the boys send through to me. Like, I barely have time to even organize the sharpshooters. Because we make sure all of us are selecting our plays in the window after teams are released. So it is a tight window, and I've just got to do the pod and the audience justice of preparing in every minute and second I've got. Plus, a little bit goes into sort of creating this online studio, uploading sort of the graphic assets on my notes, going live in several locations. Anyway, I promise you that's completely independent, and the record speaks for itself when one of my best bets has lined up with one of the sharpshooters. So in this case, it is Cowboys plus 6.5. But I'll be greedy. I want a Dolphins 1-6 win. We only got one more game to go. Sunday, and I do have a best bet, and it's a singular game on Sunday because Origin affected round. Rabbitohs, Bulldogs, Good Friday rematch. The line is 7.5 in most places, but my best bet, I'm getting the plus 8.5, $1.82 on Sportsbet. Latrell is headed to Perth, of course. Walker hurt his groin in his first game back from a calf injury. But you got greater fullback. Sullivan and Humphreys have done a job. Like, Lewis Dodd still can't even crack Bennett 17 in a week where all these others are out. We lost Campbell Graham before kickoff, which did sting for the best bet too. If he's there, Souths, maybe they build a bigger lead. Maybe they're in the game for longer. But could be a chance of getting Campbell Graham back. He's in the reserves this week. The Bulldogs go without Crichton and King. And I think the Bulldogs missed Man last time they played an Origin week because Man was 18th man, I want to say. And now Burton is 18th man for the Blues, again, for Dogs fans. And the Dogs were really off the pace last time those players were missing. And that's worth remembering. I know Jacob Preston is a huge in, and he's been out for a while with that 4-game suspension. That's a huge in. That was an arm wrestle of a game against Para for 65 minutes. But as Clarkey would say, the Dogs flexed some premiership muscle, and it did coincide with Galvin entering the fray. And, of course, and then Sexton moved to hooker. But, of course, this week with Burton on Origin duty, it's Galvin and Sexton combined in the halves. So that's going to be a new combination. I was borderline here whether to play this. Like, I do respect that the Doggies are just flying and that there's still a lot of depth there, and that the Rabbitohs are missing, as I always say, Murray, and now on top of it, Mitchell and Walker. But if in doubt, you take the points in these Origin-affected weeks. And while Souths uncharacteristically let go of the rope last week, like, I saw the moment where they just could not keep up with Raiders' intensity. And it went from, we're in front, we're level, anything could happen, to we're down a try, we could pull a try, to we're down more than a try, it's over. Generally, the South side the South side has overperformed because they have given you good value for money in terms of effort, fighting for 80 minutes. That's what I'm hoping will be the case this week. While the Dogs, yes, they're stronger and still a better team. 8.5, I'm going to play it. I know that the Dogs do have the better halves combo there with Galvin and Sexbomb, but it's a new combination too. I guess what I like about Souths also is yes, Latrell's out, but Latrell was out the first 6 or 7 weeks this season. So we've seen what Jai Gray can do. Yes, Cody Walker's out. He's been out a lot of games. Humphreys and Sullivan have had multiple opportunities and games together, so that gives me a little bit more faith that the Rabbitohs can make a good game of this. The Rabbitohs showed me a bit too in the first at least 40 against Canberra. And, you got other players that have been overlooked for Origin like Keon, who could be in for a big game here. I actually rate the Rabbitohs forward pack. And I think that that's been a strength of the Dogs, especially their line speed. But I think that the Rabbitohs can go toe-to-toe here and maybe try and get some revenge for the punishment that was handed out on Good Friday. So that's how I see it. That's why I've come up with best bet there, plus 8.5. And that does give me 3 best bets for the round. So let me know what you make of them. The next show you're going to see from me will be an Origin 2 preview. I don't know yet if it'll be Sunday or Monday night. I don't know who the guests will be, but I'll try and get some sharpshooters involved. Looking forward to that game too, although I'm nervous as a Queenslander. But let's try and get back another winning week in the NRL before that for round 15. As always, continue the conversation in the comments with me, guys. I always try and get back to as many people as I can. Hit like, subscribe, and all those little things. If you are kind enough, it does all make a difference. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you to preview Origin 2. Lego.